Let's talk about some movies. I'm Ryan Buehler, and welcome to part 2 of my James Cameron podcast. Last part, I did my crash course giving you an idea of who he is as a person and what kind of movies he makes and stuff like that. Now we're on to part 2, which is my movie talk section, where I'm going to be sitting here giving you my thoughts on all of the films that he has written and directed. Now, I am flying solo on this, so I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. I'm probably not going to go too much into spoiler talk, probably just going to do a spoiler-free, just for those who haven't seen the movies, and because I'm just here by myself, I could kind of sit here all day giving you thoughts on how much I love these movies and stuff like that, so I want to keep it brief, and get this out there, get my thoughts out so I can move on to my next director, which is M. Night Shyamalan, spoiler alert. So let's just get into it. So his first directorial debut was the short film Xenogenesis from 1978. Pretty much gave my thoughts on that. In the last part, I liked it, but it's rough because of the quality and how old it is and the audio cutting out and stuff like that, but you could still see his creative mind at work with the models and stuff like that. So I think if you're a fan of Cameron, you should watch it just to see where he came from and stuff like that. I always find it super cool to see where directors came from. But let's move on to his technically first full feature-length film directorial debut. Technically, I say, because Cameron had some difficulties while he was working on this film. So he got brought in to film this B movie, a sequel to Piranha 1. He got to do Piranha 2: The Spawning. So he got picked, and he was super excited to be able to work on like a big, I guess not really a big, but a whole film that's funded and stuff like that. But when it turned out, he had a lot of problems with the guy who brought him in to direct. They butt heads a lot and argued about a lot of different things. The guy always was talking about how he wasn't getting the shots the way that he wanted them and stuff like that. So they were having a lot of problems, and Cameron kind of got like quote unquote fired from the movie. So the stuff that Cameron actually got to direct, he doesn't really have much creative control. So it doesn't really properly represent James Cameron. He actually snuck into the editor room late one night trying to edit the film to make it the way that he was kind of trying to make it, trying to tell the story properly the way that he was imagining it. And he went through all of that, sneaking in, editing and stuff like that, and his cut didn't even get picked when the movie was released. So you could definitely, it doesn't really feel like a Cameron film like at all. It's kind of just Piranha 2. And James Cameron's name is attached to it. Even without that, the movie isn't that bad. I was expecting it to be really, really bad, but it was actually pretty decent, and I feel like you can kind of still see Cameron seeping through, just the way that he like handles the characters. The main female character actually is pretty good, pretty well acted, and well written, I think, for the time. She kind of stands on her own 2 feet and stuff like that, and kind of setting up Cameron for his strong female characters. And then Lance Hendrickson, he pops up, and he has a big role in the film, and he appears in a lot of early Cameron films, so that's pretty cool. Really, one of the big drawbacks I have for the film itself is the relationship, especially at the opening scene between the mom and the son, almost feels sexual, and it's a little uncomfortable because, like, when they first appear, you're like questioning whether they have a relationship, and then you hear him call her mom, and it's like, ooh, that's weird. But it kind of doesn't have that same feel throughout the rest of the movie, so it's just a weird start. The effects are kind of that classic 80s practical effects look to it. So there's some cool stuff that happens when like the people are getting attacked by piranhas and stuff like that. We get some cool stuff. But I mean, the movie doesn't really need to exist. I think Piranha 1 was a fun watch. Piranha 2 doesn't really need to be watched. So I think it's safe to say that this one is a passable film. But what the most important part about Piranha 2 is the fact that, you know, he got experience filming a feature-length film, but one night Cameron was in really bad conditions working on this film. He was getting paid very little. He wasn't eating. a whole lot, and his living location wasn't the best. So he got really sick, and he was out of work for like a couple days. It might have been a week or something. And one night he had a nightmare where he got attacked by a robot that was sent from the future to kill him. Okay, he actually had that as a dream, and I think that's outstanding. Like, he literally had the dream of the entire plot of Terminator 1. So after Piranha 2 came out, James Cameron would be able to go in and direct the Terminator in 1984. He actually sold the script for the Terminator to somebody that he met and was friends with from when he worked with Roger Corman. He actually sold the script for $1 because he wanted the movie to be made, but the catch was he had to direct the movie, and she agreed, let him direct the movie, and the rest is history. So in 1984, one of the greatest science fiction films of all time came out, The Terminator. So I got a couple cool things that I want to bring up about this. To get Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie, he actually drew a picture of Arnold as the Terminator and sent it to him, and I thought that was pretty cool. Obviously, Schwarzenegger agreed and came on and created one of the most iconic characters in history. So with the Terminator, you get classic Cameron ideas with the whole, like, humans cause their own destruction, and the question of artificial intelligence will it one day rise up and destroy us, and that's something that people have been thinking about before this film and ever since this film came out, and we've had countless movies talking about it, but I feel like this movie definitely sparked a big uptick in this idea. But yeah, I honestly, I could sit here all day and talk about how much I love The Terminator. I think it's one of my favorite sci-fi films. I love the low budget feel, how self-contained the story is, where it's got this massive story and the destruction of the world is on the line, and it's really self-contained between Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor, and the Terminator, going to just houses and buildings and around the city, car chases and stuff like that. But it feels such a small scale, and I really love that about this movie. And I feel like all the other Terminators don't quite have that feel because they have more money in the budget and stuff like that. But honestly, I prefer that low budget feel. I feel like it makes it even more grounded and feel more realistic and feel real. And obviously, I got to talk about the effects with this film, with the robot and the stop motion with the Terminator and the prosthetics and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, some stuff haven't aged the best, but I still find it totally watchable, and I love it every time I see it. It doesn't kind of like make me cringe on how bad it is, like some movies, especially bad CGI. Like, I don't care what it is. I'll take low budget prosthetics and low budget practical effects over bad CGI every day of the week. It'll always feel more real to me and more enjoyable. So like I love the characters in this. I love the acting. I love the music. I pretty much love everything about the film. I mean, obviously, acting isn't Oscar-worthy performances. Like, the acting doesn't compare to Terminator 2. But I still love this film. And it had a very successful box office and a very successful home video market release. Made a lot of money, which would actually allow Cameron to direct Aliens. Now, I want to rewind just a little bit and talk about it just briefly. While he was pitching Terminator and stuff like that, Cameron actually, like, while he was working on it, he wrote the script for Rambo Part 2, First Blood Part 2 with Sylvester Stallone to help fund Terminator. Now, I haven't rewatched that. I watched it once a long time ago. So all I really want to say is it's a decent action film, I think, but it just doesn't capture that same feel that First Blood had, and First Blood's one of my favorite action movies of all time, and it kind of just feels pretty generic, where First Blood was very original. So that's really all I have to say about that. It's a decent watch, but it's not like something you have to watch when watching Cameron stuff. And he also wrote the script for Aliens while working on Terminator and finding the funding. So once Terminator came out, they were like, yeah, you can do Aliens. And I'm glad he did. Aliens was released in 1986 to be the sequel to Alien from 1978 or 79. 1979, directed by Ridley Scott. I really don't think there's anybody else that could have justifiably made a sequel to the mastermind Ridley Scott himself, other than Ridley Scott. But James Cameron was a great second choice. Now, there's some big stuff with Aliens. It's kind of where James Cameron started to earn his reputation as a tyrant on set, really pushing people to their limits and not being really courteous of them, like how they were feeling and stuff like that, really trying to just push them and getting the work done and trying to get the best out of everybody. And not everybody is really a fan of that kind of style of work. And because he went overseas to Great Britain to film, there was a lot of cultural differences with the crew that came along with the film, because Cameron didn't pick them specifically. But eventually they worked it out and was able to make the film under pretty decent conditions, understanding how each person worked. But yeah, Aliens, really big because it's one of the first sci-fi films to really bring in a female audience because of how much people loved Ripley in Alien, and now she's in the forefront even more so in Aliens. So like that's a really big deal, and again, Cameron doing a really good job with strong female characters. Ripley is one of the most iconic in history. And she's badass in this film. I absolutely love the effects in this. The design, the aliens, the spaceships obviously are models, and I feel like there's certain things that obviously didn't age as great as certain films. But for the most part, excluding really the scenes with the spaceships, it looks really, really good. Oh yeah, so I think Aliens works really well as a sci-fi film. I think it works really well as an action film, a war film, a monster film. Like it hits a lot of different genres all at once, and I think it's a really good sequel to Alien, because it kind of flips the script. The first one was about a self-contained crew that didn't really know how to fight this thing, all on one spaceship, and it was a horror movie. Now this is much more, we got the military, we got weapons that could actually fight the aliens. There's a lot more of the aliens. It's not just one, it's like a whole army. So it's cool to see that creative swapping of it, and that's kind of how a sequel should be. It shouldn't be trying to remake the first one. It should be trying to do something new and fresh, and Aliens is one of the best examples of that, and we've seen Cameron be able to do that with sequels before. When we get to Terminator 2, I'll talk about that, and maybe when Avatar 2 comes out, we'll see that again. But yeah, I think Aliens is a great movie. I don't think it's as good as some of his other films, but it definitely deserves to be talked about just like it has been, and considered one of the best sci-fi films of all time. It's a really good watch, and I really like it. There's actually a moment, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the movie, it's not too big of a spoiler, but there's a particular scene towards the end of the movie where the little girl Newt is in that sewer is like in the sewer of like the basin, or I guess of the facility, and she's in the water, and that alien comes up behind her. I had seen this movie before, and it scared me. It literally sent chills down my spine. I got that jump scare. Like, it was really, really freaking effective. And I was kind of blown away that it was able to get me that well. So that's like how much the movie will draw you in, even if you've seen it before. So yeah, it's a great watch. Love the different characters with the different Marines. All of them kind of have their own thing, which is very important to differentiate them. We have another strong female character in the Marines. We got Michael Biehn from Terminator coming back as one of the Marines, and then we got Bill Paxton's in the film as one of the Marines, and he's got some of the most quotable and humorous lines in the whole film. So he's great to watch, and it's just a fun watch. And it seems like that's pretty consistent with Cameron films, is they're just fun watches and really enjoyable. So after Aliens, Cameron actually helped out his fellow colleague and very good friend Bill Paxton with a music video for Bill Paxton's band Martini Ranch, and helped him film a music video titled for the song Reach. I watched it. It's actually pretty entertaining. I really love those 80s music videos that really go over the top with their plot and costumes and locations and stuff like that. It's really fun to watch, and I totally recommend checking it out. It's a good time. But movie-wise, in 1989, Cameron would come back with The Abyss, which The Abyss is weird because it's kind of like on his lower scale of movies, but it's still a good watch, but like it's not talked about as much. And it's also really hard to watch. It's only ever been released on like VHS, DVD, I guess Laserdisc if it was. I'm pretty sure that still was going on in the 80 and 89s though. It never was re-released on Blu-ray. It's not streaming on anything. Can't rent it. No Prime Video. Nothing. So I was kind of stumped, but luckily, my old manager from my job actually gave me a whole bunch of his old DVDs, and The Abyss was in there. So like I really lucked out, and thank you, Ben. If you ever listen to this, thanks for allowing me to watch that and giving me that copy, because that really helped me out. Otherwise, I was gonna have to track it down and buy it off of eBay for like $20-$30, and that would have been a lot of effort, and I already would have had to do that with a later movie that he does. So that was nice. So the Abyss really showcases Cameron's love for diving and the ocean, and those will be big themes with Cameron going forward. The idea for The Abyss actually came from a lecture that Cameron listened to or watched about divers experimenting with liquid oxygen. And back when he was 16 years old, wrote a short story that would be the premise for The Abyss. One of the big things with The Abyss, Cameron really thought that scientists weren't used as protagonists enough. And I mean, I guess at the time that makes sense. I can't think of too many movies early 80s and stuff like that had scientist characters, but I feel like ever since this film, we see scientist characters all the time, so like watching it nowadays isn't as profound, but I guess at the time it was pretty profound. And again, just like Terminator and Piranha 2 and a bunch of his films down the line, this movie focuses on very ordinary people in extraordinary situations, kind of giving the average Joe relatable like his character is relatable to the audience, because most people aren't Marines that fight in space battles against aliens, so it's nice to have those ordinary characters to relate to, and then especially people who are scientists can kind of relate also, so that's cool. Obviously this movie is going to again talk about environmental questions and stuff like that with the ocean and the sea life and stuff like that. Cameron went through a lot to build the giant tanks that had like thousands and thousands of gallons of water in them to film the film, because it wasn't filmed in the ocean. They built a giant tank for everybody to swim in. He made it mandatory for the actors to be trained in scuba diving so they could actually be scuba diving throughout majority of the film. Cameron helped design new scuba gear, because usually scuba gear has that mouthpiece, not really leaving too much for actors to be able to act, and there's a lot of stuff going on under the water in scuba gear, so that would have been a rough watch. So he actually designed helmets so you could fully see each actor's face and give them full acting capabilities during the film. So he's just kind of like that guy. He really wants to make the film as best and watchable as possible, and really helps design and work with the technology and stuff like that for the film to work the best it can be. Cameron worked with his brother to help design a lot of like the gear for like the camera equipment and lighting stuff, because they were filming underwater, so they had to design cameras to be able to do certain camera angles and to be under the water for so long, and how deep they were going and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of different things that Cameron had to consider when making this film, so it's really like the movie wouldn't have happened at the time if Cameron wasn't the one directing it. It definitely would have never happened if he wasn't the person he is. one of the craziest stories is that Cameron actually almost drowned while filming the film. He actually they had people up at the top that would have the like displays of how much oxygen's left in all of the actors' tanks and stuff like that. And Cameron was always down there in his scuba gear swimming around with the actors, so he wasn't just up top. So he was down there, and the person who was supposed to be watching to see when he had to come up for air totally forgot to pay attention to it, and Cameron started to lose oxygen, and he started swimming up to the top. And somebody tried to go over to help him and kind of lock in an extra oxygen tank. But that oxygen tank was faulty, so then he was just practically on the verge of drowning. So he actually punched the guy in the face to swim up to the top to be able to breathe. Because when you're so far down in the water, you have to go up with a very specific motion and speed, because otherwise you're going to really hurt yourself and practically kill yourself from the pressure and stuff like that. So if it wasn't Cameron in this process, they probably would have died because Cameron had done all that training with scuba gear for years and years and years when he was growing up. So kind of crazy. I'm sure he probably wasn't the nicest guy to the person who forgot about his air tank. So I'm sure that wasn't that was probably a bad moment. And yeah, so let's talk about my thoughts. So I definitely can understand why it's kind of considered one of his lesser films. It's pretty long. They have good characters and obviously good actors in the film. Like Ed Harris is that lead guy. He does a really good job, but I feel like the characters are lacking compared to like the Marines and Aliens. They don't have as much differentiate between each person, so it kind of seems like just a lot of scientists with very similar characteristics. So you don't really you're not as entertained by them as from Aliens, and you're not enjoying the film as much. So it kind of just feels like a lot of big words and science talk and stuff like that. But I did enjoy the film. It still has that Cameron feel, and this movie was revolutionary for the time with the technology built for underwater filming, and the tank, and the technology with the scuba gear. And this is very early CGI, which actually looked really good for the time. And obviously CGI, this would be the beginning of Cameron's CGI days and would go on to build throughout his films. So I definitely think it's 100% worth giving a watch. If you have the chance to watch it, I wouldn't go out of your way to buy a DVD for $30+. But if you get the chance to watch it, I would definitely check it out, because it is a good watch. You got your good, strong female character. Actually won an Oscar for visual effects, which is pretty spectacular. And Cameron would go down and win lots of Oscars from here on out. So he knows what he's doing. But yeah, pretty cool movie. So, after a handful of years, in the year of 1991, we would get Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which it's very odd for a movie that was as successful as The Terminator was for a sequel to take so long to come out. I mean, we're talking 7 years before the sequel came out. So, definitely the big thing with this film, there's two things. You got Linda Hamilton and you got CGI. Linda Hamilton got ripped for this movie. When you're watching it, she is built. She would be able to beat the crap out of a Terminator just by the look of her. She got ripped for it. And this was one of the first times a female actress got ripped for a role in a film. And this is definitely something that is practiced a lot nowadays with females getting built for their roles. So she's definitely an icon for that and very inspirational. And she's also just freaking badass in this movie. This is peak Sarah Connor. And then with the revolutionary CGI, I mean, we have that one particular shot where we have the T-1000 phase through the bars in the prison, where he literally walks through them. It's literally a 10-second scene, maybe 15 seconds, but it was revolutionary for the time and for CGI for years and years and years to come. I mean, the whole design of the T-1000 was revolutionary with its shiny outer coating that it transforms into and stuff like that, and it's where it changes shape throughout the film. Revolutionary. And I mean, obviously it doesn't look as great as stuff nowadays, but I think for the time of 91, it looks pretty great. Yeah. So Terminator 2, I mean, I could be sitting here all day really talking about how much this movie is awesome. Like, I was really thinking about, I was like, do I like Terminator 1 more than Terminator 2? And I think this is a battle that a lot of people have. And I eventually caved, and I was like, Terminator 2, it has better acting, better writing, better effects, better storyline, with like John Connor and the relationship between him and the Terminator and stuff like that. And then Sarah Connor's character is way more interesting and badass in this film, and it kind of flipped the concept. It didn't kind of redo the exact same thing as Terminator 1. It kind of did its own thing, and for the better. The story's better. Like, pretty much everything in this movie is better than Terminator 1, except for that small scale feel that I really like, but it still feels small scale, but not as small scale. It's got one of the most iconic film moments. You got the Bad to the Bone motorcycle scene with the Terminator, one of the most iconic scenes. It's just, this movie's just a pleasure to watch. It flies by. It's action-packed. It hits all of those. I mean, you got the sci-fi, you got your drama, you got your action, you get hit in the emotions in this film. Like, it's pretty much the whole package, and there's a reason why people love it so much and talk about it so much. Like, this movie is like the peak of Cameron. I feel like, personally, I have this at my favorite film out of his library. I think this movie has everything that you could ever need. So the CGI with this movie actually would, because Cameron worked with ILM, which came from Star Wars and George Lucas's company that made Star Wars. He worked with them to do the CGI scene with the T-1000, and the technology that they created for this would go right into making Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, making one of the most iconic moments in CGI history and in cinema. And it would inspire a young Peter Jackson, who would later go and direct the Lord of the Rings series, which is very successful, very iconic, and very good pieces of cinema. So it's like, Cameron's done so much for cinema with just his handful of films. It's spectacular. Oh, this is a lot. I'm trying to get through this. We're a half hour in. So I just want to bring up, if you didn't know, Cameron actually wrote a script for Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. And the whole idea of the webs coming out of his wrist instead of web shooters is Cameron's idea, and would later be in the Sam Raimi trilogy. So I thought that was pretty cool. Interesting tidbit that I learned. But after Terminator, it would be 3 years before his next film, and that would be the film True Lies, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis and Tom Arnold. So this is a rom-com action spy film. It's got a lot of different genres blended in. You got the humorous moments, you got the romance moments, you got the action moments. So I don't really care too much for this film. I don't really quite find it as funny as it should. It definitely has a lot of moments where, like, you know a joke was said, but you don't laugh. That happened to me a lot of falling flat jokes. But I mean, there was a couple that made me laugh. Arnold Schwarzenegger, going from watching him in T2 to this, it comes off like a little too corny for me. Like, Arnold with it, like his one-liners and trying to act like James Bond, it just does not work for me. I don't think that he was right for that casting. I don't think it works. And the movie is really long. I think it's way longer than it should have been. I definitely think this movie should have been trimmed down to like an hour and 30-minute movie. I feel like, I'm pretty sure it's like on the verge of 2 hours, and I feel like that's kind of outrageous, especially for the movie that it's making. But I mean, I don't blame people who enjoy it. I mean, I really wish I enjoyed it, but it just didn't work for me. And this is definitely one of the weaker films in Cameron's library. It just didn't work. I think acting otherwise, like Tom Arnold really saves the movie with his humor. His moments are pretty great and hit the mark. Bill Paxton's moments are pretty funny. Jamie Lee Curtis works really well, I think. But it was just a little too over the top with Schwarzenegger for me to quite enjoy this film. And the runtime really hurt it for me. So after that, in 1995, a film titled Strange Days was released, which was directed by Caitlin Bigelow, who has directed Zero Dark 30, Point Break. She's made some pretty big films. Cameron was married to her at this time and actually wrote the film for her. The film stars Ralph Fiennes and Angela Bassett and Juliette Lewis. So this film is weird. So again, this is a film that's never been re-released on Blu-ray. I actually had to go on eBay and spend like $20-ish to purchase. I think it was like $15 for the DVD copy, which is kind of crazy for nowadays. It was unrentable anywhere, so I really wanted to watch it because a lot of people were talking about it, and I think this movie was really good, weird, strange. Like, I get why it's kind of like no one talks about it, but a lot of people do talk about it. It's really under the radar because there's some really weird stuff that happens in this movie. A lot of things that people would probably not appreciate, but then there's a lot of things that I feel like for current times, I'm surprised this movie's not talked about more. So like the whole premise for the film, if you want to know it, it's New Year's Eve, 1999. Anything is possible, nothing is forbidden. That's kind of the tagline, according to Letterboxd. So if you were living in the 90s, you knew that everybody figured that the machines were going to take over the world, or the world was going to end once the year 2000 came. So this movie kind of plays along with that, but it's not really the main focus of the film. The main focus is that this technology has been made where you can attach this thing to the top of your head and watch these recordings that people have made. And it's kind of really interesting concept. It feels like a Black Mirror episode almost, because we've kind of gotten a Black Mirror episode like this before. So it's kind of just about this Ralph Fiennes' character selling these machines and these videos on the black market-ish things, where you could like experience a bank robbery or experience a murder or experience something sexual, all these different options. And it's a really interesting concept. And then it kind of gets showcased like, oh man, with something pretty cool like this, something bad is probably going to come from it. And there's this serial killer who's going around killing people and recording it and like making them watch themselves being killed. And it's like really rough to watch, and it's definitely not for a lot of people because it's rough. There's like definitely a rape warning for this movie. That's definitely a big plot point in this. So if you don't want that, then stay clear of this. But I think it's really interesting film. It's got a really cool concept. Really kind of captures that fear of the year 2000. I think Angela Bassett, like I said in the last part, is a really strong, good female character. I think this was a really entertaining film, and I'm actually really glad that I watched it. Definitely one of the most unique and original films I've seen. But it was I don't want to say it's a good watch because of all the rough stuff that you see, but it's a good watch. So after Strange Days, in the year of 1997, we would get Titanic, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. So I had seen this movie before, and I was like, do I watch it again for this podcast? Because it's like a 3-hour long movie. Like, when it came out, it was released on 2 separate VHSs because it was so friggin' long. But I was like, you know what? I liked it the first time. I don't really remember too much, so I might as well, like, refresh my memory. I 100% am a part of the group that believe Titanic to be one of the greatest romance films of all time. it just is. You just 100% root for these characters, their relationship. It just works. Like, their chemistry between Leo and Kate Winslet is just perfection. I can totally understand why it was so big and so successful and so popular even today. Like, it just works. And because of the movie's length is the reason why it works, because we get to spend so much time with these characters and the development of their relationship before the whole disaster of the Titanic happens. You really feel once the stuff with the Titanic happens, because you have that dread. Even when it's happy scenes, you know the Titanic is going to sink at the end of the movie, because that's how the Titanic in history happens. So you have that really interesting watch experience that you don't get to see too often, because you know the ending but you don't, and you dread to find out what the ending is going to have happen. So I think this is an outstanding film. It's totally watching for the 3-hour watch. It works so well for a romance, and it works so well as a disaster film. And I love how it's like 2 separate films in one. It's like a combo pack. Like, you get a really good romance story and a really good disaster film, and you get to push them together and feel all the emotions. I think the acting in it is outstanding. The music is really good. The effects are really good. I mean, Cameron literally built a gigantic replica of the Titanic. Really funny story Cameron likes to tell is whenever people are like, oh man, how did you come up with the movie Titanic and stuff like that? He, a couple years before this came out, the Titanic ruins was actually discovered. And because Cameron has a love for the ocean and has a love for shipwrecks, and his love for shipwrecks definitely was, it exploded after the whole thing with the Titanic. He wanted to go see the ruins of the Titanic so badly that he actually went through the process, wrote an entire script for a movie, went and pitched it to a big studio, I think it was 20th Century Fox, and was like, imagine, he like had a whole bunch of paintings of the Titanic. He was like, imagine the Titanic, but with Romeo and Juliet on it. And that's how he sold the film. Really simple pitch, but it's so perfectly executed. Like, that's exactly what the movie is. But it was so simply put, but it perfectly explains the entire film. It's kind of outstanding. And he went through all of this to make this film, but his main goal was to go see the ruins of the Titanic. The film was kind of a secondary thing. He was like, oh man, like, I kind of want to make the movie, but like, I want to see the ruins. Like, he was like, the ruins comes first. So he came up with one of the most successful films in cinema history, one of the best romance stories of all time, just so he could go see the boat. So I think that's pretty outstanding, that he went through all that effort just to see the boat. And he has such a love for this shipwreck, like such a respect and interest in it, that he tried to make the film's replica of the Titanic as accurate to history as possible. He spoke to families and learned about victims and survivors and all of these people who lived on the boat, and there's multiple characters in the film that are directly based off of those real people who were on the Titanic. So I think that's really cool. He does say in hindsight that he didn't feel like he was as respectful to those families who lost those people that he based those characters off of, and feels like he should have been a little bit more respectful, which I definitely could get. I definitely probably would be pretty offended if it was one of my loved ones that was being shown in a movie and then dying tragically. So, but it's such a good movie. It blew me away the second time. I couldn't believe how good the movie actually is. And to 100%, you have to watch it if you're a Cameron fan. You have to watch it if you're a cinema fan, a romance fan, a Leonardo DiCaprio fan. Like, you gotta watch this movie. Because the runtime, it flies by. It's so well paced and well directed and well told. It's so good. There's a reason why it's the third highest grossing film of all time. And then actually after the Titanic came out, there's almost a decade that goes by where Cameron doesn't direct anything. Because he's so fascinated with shipwrecks, he goes and makes a bunch of documentaries of going to different shipwrecks. He makes some documentaries like in the ocean and going and exploring and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see how Cameron, like, he puts his passions first, what he cares about first, and like he made one of the most highest grossing films of all time, and he could have directed literally anything he wanted to do at that time, but he was like, no, I want to go explore the ocean. So I definitely respect him for that, and that's really interesting. And then the man comes back a decade later and makes the highest grossing film of all time, and that is Avatar in 2009. It's like mind-boggling. Like, he goes in and works and helps make motion capture suits and how the headgear work and stuff like that. He like revolutionized it with his crew to make the technology that people make all of their movies with nowadays, like all the Marvel movies and stuff like that, use pretty much Cameron's designs. So it's like he literally invented the cameras and the gear to make Avatar and to create some of the best looking CGI characters ever. I think even decades now later, it looks so good. It looks so good. We're almost 2 decades. I mean, not that. Like, we're a decade and a half. And it's like, that looks so good. So it blows me away. The movie is gorgeous to watch. Absolutely gorgeous. I wish I had gotten the chance to watch it in theaters. I'll definitely be seeing Avatar 2 in theaters because it just is mesmerizing. One of my big critiques the first time I saw it was the characters. I feel like the characters and the story itself is lacking compared to the visuals, but after my most recent rewatch, I don't really believe that anymore. I think the characters are actually really entertaining and interesting. The chemistry between our 2 leads and the romance story is really well done, and you actually really feel it as like you're seeing 2 CGI characters fall in love, and it works really, really well. The music is fantastic. I think the story has a great message with the whole environment and people coming in and taking people's lands because they want something is wrong and stuff like that. Like, it's got a really good moral behind the story, and I think it works really, really well. Even besides, I mean, obviously without the CGI characters and the mesmerizing cinematography, it wouldn't be as impactful as it was, but it still works with or without it, I think. So that's one of the best. It's one of the best movies I've seen. I totally understand why it's grossed so much money. Like, I was blown away for so many years growing up. Like, how the heck is this movie making so much money, and how is it almost at $3 billion? Now I get it. It's like you had to see it in theaters, so many people went and saw it in theaters. Like, this was one of those movies you had to see in theaters. Like, I know how I felt when I went and saw Dune. I'm sure this movie was blowing people out of their seats in 2009, so it's something I'll never be able to experience. So actually pretty interesting. Roughly before Avatar came out, Cameron was developing a script for Avatar and Alita Battle Angel. And he was kind of like, he wanted to make both films, but for both of them to work, they had to really design the CGI motion capture to make CGI characters to really make the films work. And they just so happened to be like, oh, let's try and do the Avatar characters in CGI, and they were working on that. And because they had already put so much effort into it, once they made the technology, they were like, oh man, we might as well just make Avatar. So Cameron kind of passed on directing Alita Battle Angel at the time to focus on Avatar, and then once Avatar was released, he gave Robert Rodriguez his blessing to go and direct Alita Battle Angel. And Alita Battle Angel would come out 10 years later. It was a very long process getting this movie off the ground and stuff. But I think Alita Battle Angel is probably one of my favorite films I've seen. I think Alita is one of my favorite female characters ever. You could definitely feel James Cameron's touch with the female character. Writing, it works really well. She's badass. You root for her from day one all the way up to the end of the movie. I love the visuals, the character designs. Even though Alita looks a little weird because of her big eyes, that's how it is in the manga that it's based off of from Japan, so I still think it works. It might not be for everybody, but I think it works. I mean, it's a coming-of-age story, trying to find her own place in the world. She's just badass so much in this film, and it works so well. I just, like, pumping the fist in the air, like, yelling at the TV in excitement, like every time she is fighting somebody. Like, she is like what I wish all badass female characters were like, because of how much I root for her. I wish studios were able to kind of capture that feeling that I get from Alita. So maybe one day people actually learn from their mistakes and actually make some good female characters. Because Cameron knows what he's doing. Like, just go and ask him how he does this, because he does it every single time. I honestly don't really have any criticisms for Alita Battle Angel. I think it's awesome throughout. It's a blast to watch. I'm glad I got to rewatch it. It was one of the most exciting things for me when deciding to do this podcast. I was like, oh man, I get to rewatch Alita Battle Angel. Yes! Because I hadn't seen it since it was released. So that was awesome. And I just got my fingers and my toes crossed for an Alita Battle Angel 2 to eventually come out in my lifetime. Like, please, please, please give it to me. I'm going to have to sit down and read the manga, because that's how much I like this character in the story. And I also really wish that we could have gotten like an uncut version, because Cameron was pretty adamant on the film being PG-13, because it's a coming-of-age story. It's kind of for that age group. So the age group should be able to go see the movie without needing a parent or guardian. So, I mean, that makes sense, but, like, the source material and how the movie plays out, it could have had so much more badass, like, violence and gore and stuff like that, and I'm a huge fan of that kind of cinema, so, like, I really wish we could have gotten more of that. So maybe down the line, if they make more Alita Battle Angels, maybe we'll get some more violence, but I think the violence is pretty... It's good enough in the film. It works really well, so more people can watch it, so it makes sense. And really, the last thing that I want to, I guess, bring up is Terminator Dark Fate. That was also released in 2019 and was written by Cameron, but it was not directed by him. It was directed by Tim Miller, director of Deadpool. So, again, another Terminator movie. This is the sixth in the franchise, plus a spin-off series, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Please stop making Terminator movies. Just please. I don't need any more. We do not. You can definitely feel Cameron's touch to the film. I'm not going to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but a lot of plot points in the film are really well written, and it kind of does work as a sequel to T2 Judgment Day. I think it was well done and well thought out, because it works as a pretty good sequel. But the plot, we've seen it a dozen times at this point. Terminator gets sent back from the future to fight somebody in the present day that's going to affect the future. Oh my goodness. We've seen it a million times. Like, at least Terminator Salvation tried to do something different. It didn't quite work with the story that they told, but at least they tried to do something different. And this film, it does some things different, but at the core, it's the same thing. It's cool that we get to see Linda Hamilton back, and she looks as badass as she used to. Obviously, she's aged, but she's aged pretty decent. She still seems like she could definitely hold her own in a fist fight. But again, the story's not that original besides certain plot points. I definitely like the film is written by multiple people, Cameron being a part of it, so I think they might have ruined the film with their contributions. I think that the characters, man, just aren't there. What happened? I feel like Cameron could not have possibly been a part of writing the characters in this film, because they're not him. They're the most generic, badly written, quote unquote badass female characters that we've seen so many times over the past couple years that are just badly written. It's such a shame, because I think Mackenzie Davis's character Grace she definitely has some badass moments, like 100%, and definitely holds her own, and it's really cool seeing her in these action sequences. But oh my goodness, it's just not it's not Alita. It's just not Sarah Connor. It's not Zoe Saldana from Avatar. It's just there's just something about them that just doesn't work for me, and it's a shame. I think by now, if people keep making requels and stuff like that, we're introducing new characters and having legacy characters. When you have a new character insult a legacy character that people have been in love with for decades, they're automatically not going to like that person. And I think that's a terrible character and writing perspective when writing one of these films. Like, we automatically are just going to dislike them. And I think that harms my experience with watching Grace's on screen because she insults Sarah Connor a lot. It's like, why would I take your side on this? And then I'm gonna keep it brief on Danny's character in this. Started off pretty interesting, I think, but I think again badly written, and there's some really freaking corny things that happen with her character. She could have been a really good new character for the franchise, but poorly written character, very corny, very just like unbelievable with her character arc and stuff like that. Now, what happened? So it's like, it's really a shame ending Cameron's marathon off on this note. Like, it just was disappointing. The effects in the film look really good, but I mean, not really anything special compared to movies nowadays. I think this movie is so over the top with its explosions and action pieces and stuff like that. Like, Terminator 1 and 2 I love so much because of how self-contained they are. And Terminator Dark Fate, like, they're literally going to like 12 different locations, and everywhere they go, giant explosion, giant fight, giant this, giant that, giant that. It's too much. It's like I'm watching a Michael Bay Transformers film, pretty much watching this film. Like, they like jump out of an airplane in a military vehicle falling from the sky, and it did not work for me, like, at all. I just don't want any more Terminator movies. We've seen Terminator 1, Terminator 2, they peaked. They did so much for the world of science fiction and for cinema. Terminator 3 was pretty much just the same thing. Terminator 4 tried to do something different, it just didn't work. Genesis is a soft is a reboot that I personally find super entertaining and watchable, but like, I totally understand, like, it probably shouldn't exist. I'm cool with watching it, but I totally get why people hate on it, because it's not the best movie. And I didn't get to rewatch it for this marathon, so I was kind of ashamed about that. But yeah, Dark Fate, it's just disappointing. So I'm just ready for Avatar: The Way of the Water to come out in like a week or so I can go see that and get blown away by the visuals and get excited about Cameron stuff again. Because this was really a fun marathon to do. I watched a lot of big movies in cinema. Finally got to watch the movies I hadn't seen before, like Strange Days and The Abyss. So it was a good time. Totally would recommend going and watching all of James Cameron stuff if you hadn't seen it before. Has some of the best movies in cinema, and you'll learn a lot about how CGI and stuff like that came about. It's like you're watching the stepping stones pretty much in Cameron's library. I'm just going to real quick go down my ranking for James Cameron. So I have at the bottom at 15 Xenogenesis, just because of how rough it is. It's not bad, but it's kind of hard to watch nowadays. And then I got the music video for Martini Ranch. It's fun, but it's like, it's a music video. Then we got Aliens in the Deep, which is one of Cameron's documentaries. It was pretty interesting to watch, and I'd recommend checking it out if you like Cameron, you like ocean life. That was pretty cool. Then I got Piranha 2, The Spawning. Honestly, that should probably be at the bottom of my ranking. Terminator Dark Fate next. True Lies, Rambo, First Blood Part 2, based off of what I remember. Then I have The Abyss at number 8, Strange Days at number 7, Aliens at number 6, The Terminator at 5, which is kind of outstanding to me, Alita Battle Angel at 4, Avatar at number 3, Titanic at number 2, and Terminator 2 Judgment Day at number 1. All right. Actually, before I let you go, while I was editing this podcast, I actually realized that I never brought up like what movie you should start with James Cameron in this or the Crash Course portion of the podcast. So I just wanted to real quick add on and say that I feel like it's pretty simple, and you should just start with the Terminator. I think that's a safe bet. One of his best films, but it's not his best film. So hopefully that helps you out. Had a blast watching Cameron's stuff, even some of his stuff that I didn't like. It was still fun getting to rewatch stuff and watching stuff for the first time. Definitely go check out his stuff. Next month is going to be on M. Night Shyamalan, or whenever the next episode comes out. I think it's going to come out in January. So, go watch Avatar: The Way of the Water. Support the man himself, James Cameron. And thank you very much for listening, and I will see you guys on the next video. Have a good one.